Stop what you're doing. I need you to look at that door. Really look at it. That door has been locked for 50 years. 50 years. My grandmother is 79 years old. She has lived in this house since 1974. And in all of that time, through the deaths of people she loved, through the births of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, through Christmases and funerals and ordinary Tuesdays, she has never once opened that door. Not once. Not even on the day she almost sold the house and moved away. Not even on the night the roof leaked and water came in everywhere and we were all running around with buckets. Not even then. I used to think it was just a storage room. A place where old, forgotten things go to sit in the dark and collect dust and be slowly forgotten themselves. I used to joke about it when I was a child, dare my cousins to knock on the door, press our ears against it and pretend we could hear something moving inside. We'd laugh. And then Granny would appear at the end of the hallway and just look at us. Not angry. Not upset. Just quiet. And we'd scatter, the way children do when they sense they've come close to something they shouldn't. And nobody ever asked about the room. Not directly. Not where Granny could hear. 3 weeks ago, I was in the kitchen of this house, sorting through a drawer full of old batteries and string and things that had no business being in a kitchen drawer. And I found something. An envelope. Old. Sealed. And written on the front in my grandmother's handwriting were 3 words. Do. Not. Open. I opened it. And what I found inside that room, what my grandmother had been locking away from the world, and from herself, and from everyone who loved her, for 50 years, is the reason I'm sitting here making this video today. This is not a ghost story. It's not a mystery in the thriller sense. But it is, without question, the most extraordinary, the most heartbreaking, and in the end the most beautiful thing I have ever discovered. And it's a story about the woman who taught me almost everything I know about love and strength and what it means to endure. My grandmother's name is Peggy. And for 79 years, she has kept a secret that changed the entire shape of her life. A secret so heavy that she built a room around it and locked the door and threw away the key, or so she thought. I found the key. And I'm going to tell you everything. Before I take you into that room, I need to take you somewhere else first. I need to take you back to the beginning. Back to a small stone house on a hill, and a summer afternoon in my childhood, and the woman standing in the doorway with flour on her hands. Because you cannot understand what was in that room until you understand the woman who put it there. So let's go back. The first time I ever saw this house, I was 5 years old. My mum had woken me up early, earlier than I was used to on a Saturday, early enough that the light was still that pale, milky color it gets before the sun properly decides to show up. She dressed me quickly, bundled me into my coat even though it wasn't cold enough to need one, and put me in the back seat of the car. And I fell asleep almost immediately, the way young children do, completely, entirely, like a switch being turned off. When I woke up, we were somewhere I had never been before. The car was moving slowly along a narrow lane with hedges on either side so tall they made a tunnel of green. And at the end of that lane was a gate. And beyond the gate was a path. And at the end of the path, sitting at the top of a gentle hill surrounded by oak trees that must have been 100 years old, was the house. It was not a grand house. Let me be clear about that. It was not impressive in the way that large houses are impressive. It was 2 stories of gray stone with a slate roof and small windows and a chimney at each end, and it looked like it had grown up out of the hill rather than been built on top of it. It looked like it had always been there. Like it would always be there. And standing in the doorway, before my mom had even turned off the engine, before I had even properly woken up, was Granny. She was wearing a pale blue apron. She always wore a pale blue apron. I don't know if she had one apron or 20 identical ones, it doesn't matter. In my memory, it is always the same pale blue apron, always slightly dusted with flour, because she was always in the middle of baking something. She had gray hair, even then, I have never known her to have any other color, pulled back in a soft bun with a few strands loose around her face. She was not a tall woman, not a large woman, but she had a presence about her that made her seem larger than she was. She stood in that doorway and she looked at the car and she smiled, and even from inside the car, through the glass, I could feel the warmth of that smile landing on me like sunlight. She opened the car door before my mom could even get around to it. She reached in and she lifted me out. I was 5, I was small, she lifted me easily, and she pulled me into a hug. And she smelled like lavender and warm bread and something underneath both of those things that I can only describe as safety. That specific, inexplicable smell of a place where nothing bad can reach you. There she is, she said. Just that. There she is. Like I was something she had been waiting for. That was the moment. That was the exact moment this house became the most important place in my world. I spent more of my childhood in this house than I did in my own. Every school holiday. Every summer that stretched out long and golden and apparently endless the way summers do when you are a child and time moves differently. Every Christmas, always here, always this house, always the smell of pine and cinnamon and something roasting, always Granny moving between the kitchen and the sitting room and the kitchen again, producing an apparently endless supply of food and warmth and calm. I knew this house the way you know a place that has shaped you. I knew which stair creaked, the 4th from the bottom, always the 4th. I knew that the back door stuck in the rain and you had to lift the handle slightly before you pushed. I knew that the best light in the house came in through the sitting room window in the late afternoon, turning everything amber and gold. I knew that there was a particular spot in the garden, under the largest oak tree, where the roots had pushed up through the earth and made a natural seat, where Granny would sometimes go and sit alone when she thought nobody was watching. I knew all of it. All of it except one room. The attic room was at the very end of the upstairs hallway. You walked past the bathroom, past Granny's bedroom with its floral curtains and the old dressing table with the oval mirror, past the little room where she kept her sewing machine and her fabric and her boxes of thread in every color, and then there it was. A door that looked exactly like all the others. Same wood, same frame, same height. Except for the padlock on the latch. Heavy, dark, gold. I asked Granny about it when I was 7. We were in the kitchen, she was peeling potatoes, her back was to me. I said, very casually, in the way that children try to be casual when they're burning with curiosity, Granny, what's in that room upstairs? The one with the lock. She didn't turn around. She kept peeling. And she said, very quietly and very calmly, old things, love. Nothing interesting. Just rubbish I haven't cleared out. What kind of old things? I pressed, because I was 7 and I had no sense of when to stop. Old things, she said again. And her voice had a quality to it I didn't have a name for at 7, I can name it now, finality. The conversation was over. She turned around and offered me a biscuit, and I took it and I forgot about it for at least 3 days. But the question came back. It always came back. I asked again at 9. At 12. At 14. Each time I got a slightly different version of the same answer. Old things. Junk. Nothing for you. Each time her voice had that same quality of finality that I learned, as I got older, to recognize and respect even when I didn't understand it. When I was 16, I tried the door handle while Granny was in the garden. I don't know what I expected. It was clearly locked, had always been locked, the lock was right there. I don't know why I thought the handle might yield differently that time. It didn't. And as soon as I had tried it, I felt a wash of guilt and shame that sent me straight back downstairs, and I never tried again. The room became a kind of legend in our family. Not discussed, not interrogated, just acknowledged. The locked room. Granny's locked room. When new people came into the family, partners of cousins, in-laws, family friends, they would sometimes notice it and ask. And whatever family member they asked would give a small shrug and say Granny's storage room. She never goes in there. And that would be the end of it. My mother, when I was in my late 20s and persistent enough to push, said simply, "Some things are better left alone." And then she changed the subject in a way that told me clearly that she knew more than she was saying, and had decided, for reasons of her own, not to say it. I let it go. I had my own life, my own concerns. The room stayed locked. The years went by. Granny got older. The house stayed the same. Until 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, Granny called me. She had had a fall, not a serious one, she insisted, very firmly, in the voice she uses when she doesn't want anyone to make a fuss. She had stumbled in the kitchen, caught herself on the counter, hadn't hurt anything but her pride. But she lived alone, and she was shaken, and she wanted someone to come and stay for a few days. I was there within 2 hours. And that is where the story really begins. Granny looked smaller than the last time I had seen her. She always does, every time. It's one of those awful optical illusions of age, the way the people you love seem to compress slightly each time you see them after a gap, the way the world seems to be very slowly, very gently, pressing them down. She was sitting in her chair by the window when I arrived, a blanket over her knees even though it wasn't particularly cold, a cup of tea going cold on the table beside her. She perked up the moment she saw me. That's Granny. She will be sitting alone in a quiet house looking out at a gray afternoon, and the moment someone she loves walks through the door she is somehow immediately brighter, more present, more herself. She started to get up and I told her not to be ridiculous and went and sat beside her instead, and we talked for an hour before I even thought about unpacking. She was fine. Really fine, not just fine in the way she says she's fine when she isn't. Embarrassed, more than anything, about having fallen. Annoyed with herself. She kept saying things like, "I don't know what came over me. I've walked through that kitchen 10,000 times and I'm perfectly all right. I just thought it would be nice to have some company for a few days," which told me that she had been more shaken than she was admitting, because Granny doesn't ask for company unless she genuinely needs it. She is a woman who is comfortable in her own quiet. She has lived alone for 40 years and she is not lonely in the way that some people are lonely. She is contained. Complete. She asks for company when she needs it, not as a matter of course. I stayed. I cooked dinner that first evening, a proper dinner, the kind she would have made herself, because she is suspicious of things that don't involve potatoes and something from the garden, and we ate together at the kitchen table and talked about everything and nothing. My life. Her neighbor's new dog that barked at odd hours. A program she'd been watching on television. The garden, which needed work but the weather hadn't been cooperating. That evening felt easy and warm and ordinary, the way time with Granny usually does. I went to bed late, listening to the sounds of the house settling around me, the way old houses do. They speak, old houses, in a language of creaks and murmurs, like a living thing adjusting itself in sleep. The next day, while Granny napped after lunch, she naps after lunch most days now, a habit she has only recently accepted without fighting. I decided to be useful. She had mentioned several times, without ever making it a request exactly, that the house could do with some organizing. Drawers that had accumulated years of miscellany. Cupboards that hadn't been properly sorted since the last time someone had sorted them, which may have been never. I started with the kitchen. It felt like the right place, the heart of the house, the room she used most, the room most in need of attention without being too personal. I started with the small drawers first. The ones near the back door, where these things always seem to collect. The first drawer, rubber bands, dead batteries, a penknife, 2 birthday candles, a small roll of twine, 6 different types of tape, none of which was full. I sorted through it, threw out what was clearly rubbish, organized the rest into small piles. The second drawer, takeaway menus from places that no longer existed, a small notepad with a shopping list written in handwriting I didn't recognize, a measuring tape, 3 keys that didn't seem to open anything in the house. I set those aside, a packet of sticking plasters, and a cork from a bottle of wine with a date written on it in marker. 2003, I had no idea what the occasion was. The third drawer was worse. The third drawer was the drawer that every house has, the drawer where things go when they have no other home. Where things end up when you need somewhere to put them quickly and you'll definitely sort them out later, and later never comes. Batteries, more batteries, a truly unnecessary quantity of batteries, old receipts, bits of string, a handful of coins from 3 different countries, 2 buttons that had clearly come off garments that no longer existed, a stubby pencil, a Christmas cracker toy still in its wrapper, half a packet of chewing gum that was probably older than some of my cousins. I worked through it methodically. There is something satisfying about bringing order to chaos, even small chaos, the small, tangible pleasure of knowing that something is better than it was. And then, at the back of the drawer, pushed right to the back where you couldn't see it unless you took everything else out first, which is why it had clearly been there for a very long time undisturbed, I found the envelope. It was small. Smaller than a standard letter envelope. Brown, the kind of brown that used to be ordinary and now looks somehow old-fashioned. It had been sealed, the flap was glued down, not just tucked, and along the front, in handwriting that was unmistakably Granny's but somehow different from her usual writing, slightly less controlled, slightly more urgent, were 3 words. Do not open. I held it in my hand for a long moment. It was light. Almost nothing. But not nothing, there was a slight weight to it. Something small and hard inside. I want to be very clear about this, a person who goes through other people's things. I believe in privacy. I believe in the sanctity of the things people choose to keep private. I have never read someone else's diary or gone through someone's phone or opened someone's post. I am genuinely not that kind of person. But I sat there with this envelope in my hand, and I thought about some things. I thought about the fact that Granny was 79 years old. I thought about the fact that she lived alone. I thought about the fact that if she had put this envelope somewhere and sealed it and written those words on it and pushed it to the back of a drawer, she had done so a long time ago. A very long time ago. Long enough that the paper had yellowed and the handwriting on the front had that faded quality of something exposed to light over many years. I thought about the fact that whatever was inside this envelope, whatever small, hard thing was inside, it had been sitting at the back of this drawer for a very long time. And at some point, whether by design or by forgetting, it had stopped being something Granny thought about. Or if she thought about it, she never acted on what she thought. I thought about the locked room. And I thought, what if she needs someone to do this? What if she has needed someone to do this for years, and nobody ever did, because nobody ever found the envelope, because it was at the back of the drawer? What if the thing she needs is exactly this, someone who loves her enough to open it, knowing she might be angry, knowing it might be the wrong thing, knowing the risk? I know that sounds like rationalization. Maybe it is. Maybe I just wanted to know. Maybe curiosity is the honest explanation. I have turned this over many times in the weeks since, and I still don't know exactly what mixture of love and nosiness and instinct caused me to do what I did next. I opened the envelope. I turned it over in my hands and I carefully broke the seal. It was brittle, old, it came apart without much resistance, and I unfolded the top of the envelope. Inside was a key. An old iron key. Dark, almost black, with age and disuse. Heavy for its size. The kind of key you'd expect to find in a much older building, the kind of key that belongs to an earlier century. The kind of key that opens a lock that was made to stay locked. I knew, in the immediate, wordless, cellular way that you sometimes know things, exactly what it opened. I sat at the kitchen table and I held the key and I didn't move for a long time. The house was quiet. I could hear Granny breathing, slow and regular, through the ceiling of the kitchen. Still asleep. I turned the key over in my hand. It left a faint dark mark on my palm, rust, or age, or something I couldn't name. I set it on the table. I looked at it. And then I got up. And I went upstairs. The hallway felt different with the key in my hand. Longer. The house felt very still, that particular quality of stillness that only happens when one person is sleeping and one person is awake and they are in the same building. The kind of stillness you don't want to break. I walked past the bathroom. Past Granny's room, the door slightly ajar, the sound of her sleep faint but audible. Past the sewing room. And I stood in front of the door. The lock was stiff. Of course it was. 50 years of not being turned will do that to a lock. The key went in smoothly enough, it fitted perfectly, but when I tried to turn it nothing moved at first. I adjusted my grip. Applied more pressure. Tried a slightly different angle. On the third try, the lock turned. The padlock released. I pulled it free from the latch and held it in my hand and looked at the door. And then I pushed it open. The smell hit me before anything else. Dust, deep, settled, undisturbed dust, the kind that has the weight of years in it, the kind that smells not just like dirt but like time. And underneath the dust, something else. Several other things, layered and mingled until they were almost indistinguishable from each other. Old fabric. Old paper, the specific dry, slightly sweet smell of aged paper, of books and letters and things written down in another era. Old wood, warm and slightly resinous. And underneath all of it, so faint I thought at first I was imagining it, something floral. Not flowers exactly. A perfume. The ghost of a perfume that had been wearing away for decades, that existed now more as a memory of a smell than a smell itself. I stood in the doorway for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. The room had one window on the far wall, small, set deep into the stone, and so thick with grime and cobwebs that almost no light came through it. I turned on my phone torch. The room was smaller than I had imagined it. In the years I had spent wondering about it, the room had grown in my mind. I had imagined it vast and full, a cavern of secrets. It was not vast. It was a modest room, the size of a large bedroom, with a sloping ceiling on one side where the roofline came down. The floor was bare wood, the same old dark boards as the rest of the upstairs, thick with dust. And in the room, arranged with a care that suggested they had been placed here deliberately, thoughtfully, not thrown in at random, were things. Things covered with white sheets. Several boxes, some cardboard, some wooden, stacked near the walls. A large trunk in the far corner, dark wood, brass clasps. A dress form standing near the window, something draped over it. A small chest of drawers. And there, in the corner nearest the door, a wooden rocking chair. On the rocking chair sat a stuffed toy rabbit. I don't know why the rabbit was the thing that got me first. Of all the things in that room, the boxes, the trunk, all the covered shapes whose contents I couldn't yet know, it was the rabbit that made something shift in my chest. It was gray with age. The kind of gray that used to be white, or cream, or some other light color, that time had drained to gray. One of its button eyes was missing. The other looked out at the room with a fixed, patient expression. It was sitting upright in the rocking chair as if placed there intentionally. As if someone had put it there carefully, deliberately, wanting it to be comfortable. I took a step into the room. Then another. The floorboards were silent under me, no creaking, which surprised me. As if the room had been waiting so long it had forgotten how to protest. I looked around more carefully. On top of one of the boxes near the wall, there were framed photographs. 6 or 7 of them, standing in a row, except they were face down. All of them, every single one, face down. As if whoever had arranged this room had needed to leave it, had taken one last look around, had decided they could not bear to have the photographs looking out at an empty room. Could not bear to leave those faces looking at nothing. There was a baby's crib. Old-fashioned, wooden, with curved bars and a little hood. It was positioned near the window, as if whoever had put it there had wanted it to have light. Inside the crib, folded neatly, were tiny clothes. A small white nightgown. A knitted blanket in pale yellow. A tiny hat, the kind newborns wear, folded carefully on top. They were so small. So impossibly, heart-crushingly small. I did not touch the clothes. I'm not sure I could have, in that moment. The dress form near the window had a garment draped over it. I moved closer and looked. It was a dress. Not a wedding dress, nothing white or formal. A summer dress, pale green, with small flowers on it. Old-fashioned in its cut, the kind of silhouette that belongs to a particular era. It had been placed on the dress form carefully, smoothed out, as if being preserved. As if someone had wanted it to keep its shape. The boxes near the walls were closed. Cardboard, old, softened with age at the corners. I didn't open them yet. I was moving through the room slowly, trying to understand it before I disturbed it. Trying to read the language of it. And then I turned to the trunk. It was large, the kind of trunk you'd pack for a long journey, the kind of trunk that suggests permanence and weight and intention. The wood was dark and smooth, the grain still beautiful under the years of dust. The brass clasps had oxidized to a deep verdigris green. There was no lock on it, just the clasps, pushed closed. I crossed the room and knelt down in front of it. The floor was cold through the fabric of my trousers. The dust rose slightly around me as I moved, hanging in the thin light from my phone torch like something disturbed from a long sleep. I reached out and unfastened the clasps. They were stiff in the way of things that haven't been moved in decades, but they opened. Both of them. And I put my hands on the edge of the lid. And I lifted it. The trunk was full. Not overfull, not chaotic, everything inside it had been placed there with the same care and deliberateness as the rest of the room. But it was full, in the way of a life that has been carefully compacted into a container. Bundles of letters tied with ribbon, one blue, one red, one yellow so pale it was almost white, one that might once have been green. Photographs, loose, stacked in a pile with a rubber band around them that had long since perished and left only the ghost of a ring on the topmost photograph. A dark green hardback notebook with a plain cover. A small bundle of dried flowers, roses, I thought, though they were so dry and ancient they had collapsed almost entirely into themselves, and when I looked at them I thought if I touched them they would crumble. A small box, wooden, with a little brass clasp that I didn't open yet. And at the bottom, beneath all of it, a folded piece of cloth in pale green, the same pale green as the dress on the dress form. I reached for the letters first. The bundle with the yellow ribbon was on the top. I picked it up, it was lighter than I expected, letters always are. There is something strange about how little physical weight a correspondence can have when its emotional weight is enormous, and I untied the ribbon carefully. It came apart easily, dried and brittle, and I laid it aside. There were perhaps 20 letters in the bundle. The envelopes were thin, the thin, almost translucent paper of another era, and the handwriting on the fronts had that quality of fading, of writing that is slowly being claimed back by the white of the paper. But the top letter, the first in the bundle, was still legible. It was addressed to Peggy. No surname, just Peggy. And in the top left corner, where a return address might go, there was just an initial. I looked at the date on the postmark. Faded, but readable with the torch held close. 1963. My grandmother would have been 18 years old. I took the letter out of its envelope, very carefully. The paper was fragile, it had that slight crispness of old paper that warns you it could tear easily, and I unfolded it. And I started to read. I'm going to tell you what the letters were about. Not word for word, they are private, they belong to my grandmother. And there are things in them that I will not share because they are not mine to share. But the substance of them. The shape of them. What they told me. They were love letters. Not the polite, careful, arm's-length letters of the era, not the kind of letters that say, I have been thinking of you fondly and mean something much more than they say. These were love letters in the most direct, unambiguous sense of those words. Whoever had written them to my grandmother had been in love with her, completely, overwhelmingly, without reservation. The writing was not restrained. It was not careful. It was the writing of someone who had either chosen, or been forced, to put everything into letters because they could not say it any other way. Because there were no other words left. The letters spoke about missing her. About thinking of her constantly. About specific memories, an afternoon by a river, the way she laughed at something someone said at a dance, the color of her coat one evening in autumn. About hope. About fear. About a future they were imagining together and the obstacles standing between them and that future. And at the end of each letter, the same sign-off. Always E, just E. I read the letters from the yellow ribbon bundle. Then I reached for the blue ribbon bundle. More letters, different dates, these ones slightly earlier, some from 1961, some 1962. And at the back of each bundle, folded more carefully than the others, kept separately, copies of letters that had been written back. Copies in my grandmother's own handwriting, clearly made before the letters were sent, kept as a record of what she had said. What she had said, in return, was the same thing. Love. Uncomplicated, enormous, honest love. Written by an 18-year-old girl to someone she called, in one letter, the only person who has ever made the world feel like the right size. I stopped reading. I sat back on my heels on the cold dusty floor and I breathed. Because by the time I had read those letters, I had understood something. The person who had written to my grandmother, E, was a woman. I need to say that clearly, because it matters to everything that comes after. Whoever E was, this person my grandmother had loved with her whole self at 18 years old, was a woman. The letters made this clear without making anything of it, in the way that love letters do, not announcing what they are, just being what they are, and if you read them with attention there is no ambiguity at all. I put the letters down very carefully. I set them back in the trunk in the order I had found them. And then I reached for the photographs. The rubber band that had held them together had perished. It left a dark ring on the topmost photograph, but fell apart when I touched it. I lifted the stack carefully, keeping them in order, and looked at the first one. It was a black and white photograph of two young women in a field. Taken in summer, they were squinting slightly against bright light, and the grass around them was tall and pale the way it gets in August when the sun has had its way with it for weeks. They were standing close together. Not holding hands, their hands were at their sides, but close in a way that bodies know, in a way that wasn't accidental. One of them was my grandmother. I have seen photographs of Granny young, there are a few in albums downstairs, formal things, Christmas gatherings, a wedding photograph from my parents' wedding where she is in a pale pink suit looking dignified and slightly uncomfortable in heels. But I have never seen a photograph of her like this. She looked completely different. Not younger in the way that time makes everyone look younger, different in some deeper way. Her hair was loose. Long, loose, falling around her face and shoulders. In every photograph I have ever seen of her she has had her hair up or back or neatly arranged. In this photograph it was simply loose, and she looked free in a way that I can't attach to any other word. She was laughing. Not smiling. Laughing. Her whole face was open with it. The other woman was tall and dark-haired, with a wide, easy smile and very bright eyes that the black and white film couldn't capture exactly but that clearly had some color to them, dark, vivid, present. She had her arm around Granny's shoulders. And Granny's hand had come up to hold the hand on her shoulder. Just holding it. Covering it. I looked at that detail for a long time. The hand covering the hand. I turned to the next photograph. The same two women. A beach this time. Sitting on a low stone wall, the sea visible in the background, gray and bright at once. Their heads were tilted toward each other, not touching, but almost. As if the space between them had collapsed to almost nothing, as if gravity was at work. They were both looking at something beyond the frame of the photograph. Their expressions were quiet, at rest, peaceful in the specific way of people who are exactly where they want to be. A third photograph. An indoor setting, a hall, or a large room, with other people visible in the background, blurred by the focus of the camera and the era of the photography. A social gathering of some kind. Music, I imagined. There was something in the posture of the people in the background that suggested dancing, or the anticipation of dancing. In the foreground, Granny and the other woman. And in this photograph, unlike the others, they were looking at each other. Not at the camera, not at whatever was beyond the frame. At each other. And there was something in the quality of that looking, in the quality of being looked at like that I felt in my chest like a pressure. I set the photographs down. I looked around the room. The baby's crib. The tiny folded clothes. The rabbit with one eye. The face-down photographs now turned face-up. The trunk full of letters. And something assembled itself, piece by piece, into a shape I could understand. This was not a storage room. This was not where old, forgotten things went to collect dust. This was a memorial. A private, locked, carefully tended memorial to a part of my grandmother's life that the rest of the world had never known existed. To a love that had been real and enormous and had been taken from her. To a life she had lived before she became the woman I knew, the woman in the pale blue apron, the woman who smelled like lavender, the woman who always knew when someone was arriving, the woman who made every room feel safe. She had not always been that woman. Or rather, she had always contained that woman, but she had also contained this. This girl in the photograph with her hair loose and her hand over someone else's hand, laughing in a field. This girl who had loved someone completely, and had written it down in letters, and had kept the letters in a trunk in a locked room for 50 years. I heard her moving downstairs. I came downstairs slowly. Not because I was trying to delay, or not only because of that, but because I needed those few seconds. Those few seconds between the room and the kitchen. Between what I had just understood and the moment I would have to say something about it. Granny was standing at the kitchen counter with her back to me. She was filling the kettle at the sink. She heard my footsteps on the stairs and said, without turning, in her perfectly ordinary voice, "I thought you'd gone for a walk." "Tea?" "Yes, please," I said. I sat down at the kitchen table. She put the kettle on. Opened the cupboard. Got out the mugs, the same mugs she's had since before I was born, heavy cream-colored things with a small blue stripe around the rim. Opened the tin where she keeps the tea bags. And then she turned around to say something. I don't know what she was going to say, something ordinary, something about biscuits or the weather or whether I'd eaten lunch, and she saw my face. She stopped. "What's the matter with you?" she said. And I looked at her, at this woman who had been the constant of my entire life, this woman who had held me and fed me and dried my tears and sat beside me through everything, and I said, "Granny, I found a key." The color in her face didn't change. The expression on her face didn't change. She was very still for a moment, still in the way of someone who has just heard something they have been both dreading and, in some very deep and quiet place inside themselves, waiting for. She looked at me for a long time. Long enough that the kettle began to steam and neither of us moved to do anything about it. What key? She said. Not a question. In the kitchen drawer, I said. The third drawer. In an envelope. Granny, I read what was written on it. I know I shouldn't have opened it. I know it said not to. But I did, and I used it, and I went into the room. And I'm so sorry if I shouldn't have done that. I'm so sorry. She turned back to the counter. She made the tea, both mugs, tea bags in, kettle poured, the whole process completed in silence. She put both mugs on the table, sat down across from me, wrapped both hands around her mug. Looked at it. Then she looked up at me. Did you read the letters? She said. Some of them, I said. Yes. I'm sorry. She nodded once. A very small, very controlled nod. And then she said something I was completely unprepared for. I've been waiting for someone to find those for a very long time. I didn't say anything. I waited. I didn't put them there for someone to find, she said. I want you to understand that. I put them there because I didn't know what else to do with them. And then they stayed there because opening the room meant accepting certain things. And I wasn't ready. And then the years went by and I was never ready. And eventually I thought, I'm an old woman now. Maybe I'll die and someone will find it after I'm gone and it won't matter because I won't have to be here for it. She paused. But here you are. Here I am, I said. She was quiet for a moment. She looked down at her tea. And then, slowly, like someone lifting something heavy that they have been carrying for a very long time and have finally decided to set down, she began to talk. She talked for 3 hours. I am going to share with you what she told me. As much as I can. As much as she has given me permission to share, because yes, I have asked her permission, and she has given it, and in fact she said share whatever you like, love, I'm 79 years old, what are they going to do to me? She said that. I wrote it down because it made me laugh even in the middle of everything. Her name was Eleanor. Eleanor Mary Callahan. She had lived in the next village, about 2 miles away, close enough to walk, which they often did. She had been a year older than Granny. Dark-haired, as I had seen in the photographs, with what Granny described as the kind of laugh that made everyone else want to laugh too, whether they knew what was funny or not. They had met at a church social when Granny was 17, a dance, organized by the parish, the kind of event that was both strictly wholesome and the primary place where young people of the era managed to encounter each other with any freedom. Granny had been there with friends. Eleanor had been there with her sister. They had been introduced by someone, neither of them remembered who, and had spent the rest of the evening talking, standing at the edge of the room while the dance went on without them, so absorbed in each other that they had forgotten entirely to be participants in the event they had both come to. What did you talk about? I asked. Everything, Granny said. Nothing. I can't tell you specifically. I can tell you that it was the first time in my life I had talked to someone and felt like they were actually listening. Like what I was saying was interesting to them. Like I was interesting to them. I wasn't used to that feeling. I wasn't used to matching to someone in that way. They began meeting regularly after that. First under the convenient cover of being from neighboring villages, of happening to run into each other at the shops or on the lane between the two villages. Then more deliberately, planning their meetings carefully, telling their families half-truths about where they were going and with whom. This was not, Granny was clear about this, because either of them had fully articulated to themselves what the meetings were. They were just two girls who wanted to spend time together, who were happier in each other's company than in anyone else's, who wrote to each other when they couldn't meet, long letters that started formally and became quickly and inevitably something much less formal. When did you understand what it was? I asked. She thought about this for a moment. There was an afternoon, she said. We were walking along the river. There's a path along the river between the two villages. It's still there, or it was last time I looked, and Eleanor stopped to look at something in the water, I don't know what, a bird or a fish or just the way the light was moving. And I looked at her face while she was looking at the water. And I had this thought, very clearly, like a voice speaking in my head, I love her. That's it. That is the exact thought I had. I love her. And then immediately after that, a second thought, well, that's a problem. Were you frightened? I asked. Terrified, she said. Without hesitation. It was 1962. I was 17 years old. I was a Catholic girl in a small village in the countryside. The vocabulary for what I was feeling didn't exist in my world. I didn't have words for it that weren't terrible words. Words that meant something shameful and wrong. And what I felt was not shameful. It was not wrong. It was the most right thing I had ever felt in my life. That was the most frightening part, I think. Not the feeling itself, but the fact that it felt so right, when everything around me was insisting it was wrong. They had 5 years. Granny said it simply, 5 years, as if 5 years were a small thing, and then she stopped herself and said, actually, no. 5 years is not a small thing. I want to be accurate. 5 years of being completely known by someone, of being completely understood, of being loved in the way that fits your actual shape rather than the shape the world thinks you ought to be, 5 years of that is not a small thing. It is, in fact, more than many people get in a lifetime. 5 years of letters. Of meetings along the river path, in fields, in the homes of trusted friends who knew and said nothing. Of dancing at social events and sitting carefully apart and looking at each other from across the room in a way that Granny said, looking back, must have been completely obvious to anyone who was actually paying attention. Of being, for each other, the only person in the room regardless of how many other people were in it. And then, in 1967, everything fell apart. Eleanor became pregnant. Granny told me this quietly, without preamble, just stated it as a fact that had to be stated to continue the story. I asked, without thinking, how, and then caught myself, and felt my face go hot. Granny gave me a look that contained a lifetime of something and said, simply, she was also trying to live in the world as it was, not just the world as she wanted it. Eleanor had been, alongside her relationship with Granny, seeing a young man from a town nearby. Not a relationship of love, Granny was careful to say this, not to be unkind about it but because she thought it was important to be accurate. A relationship of obligation. Of trying to be, externally, the thing the world expected. Of the kind of half-life that Granny herself had also been living, had also thought she would have to continue to live indefinitely, in parallel with the real life she was living with Eleanor. Were you angry? I asked. She considered this carefully. Not at Eleanor, she said. How could I be angry at Eleanor for doing the same thing I was doing? We were both trying to survive. We were both trying to be normal in a world that had a very narrow definition of normal. I was angry at everything else. At the situation. At the fact that we had been born into that world and not some other, better world. At the unfairness of it. I was very angry at the unfairness of it. Eleanor's pregnancy, when it began to show, was impossible to conceal. And when Eleanor's family understood what had happened, and through the inevitable workings of a small community, when Granny's family found out too, the shape of things became clear very quickly. They spoke to each other, Granny said. The families. They talked about it and decided what was to be done and then informed us of the decision. Eleanor would be sent to her aunt in another county, away from the village, away from any gossip or consequence. The baby would be given up. And the other business. The business with me. That would stop. It would be over. Everyone would move forward, and nothing would be said, and the whole thing would be treated as though it had never happened. She was quiet for a moment. They were not cruel people, she said. My mother was not a cruel person. Eleanor's family were not cruel people. They were frightened people. They were people of their time, doing what people of their time did with things they didn't understand and were afraid of. I know that. I understood it even then, I think, at the time, in some part of myself that was capable of understanding it. But another part of me, the part that loved Eleanor, the part that had been told I would never see her again, the part that understood what was going to happen to the baby, that part was not capable of understanding anything except that something enormous had been destroyed, and there was nothing I could do about it. Did you fight it? I asked. Did you try? Yes, she said. For a while. I argued. I cried. I said things to my mother that I regret saying, not because they weren't true but because she didn't deserve the full force of them, she was doing what she thought was right. I tried to see Eleanor and was not allowed. I wrote to her and the letter was intercepted. And then I stopped. Not because I stopped wanting to fight, but because I understood that fighting was only hurting everyone around me and changing nothing. Eleanor was gone. The baby was going. And I had to decide what to do with the rest of my life. The baby, I said carefully. Did you know about, was there a baby in that room? She looked at me steadily. Yes, she said. A girl. Eleanor had a girl. I was not told this at the time, I was not told anything, I was told only that it was done and over and not to be thought of anymore. But some years later, a mutual friend, someone who had known us both, who had known everything, she told me. A girl. Healthy. Adopted by a family somewhere, she didn't know where. She didn't know the name she was given. I thought about the tiny clothes in the crib. The yellow knitted blanket. The hat folded neatly on top. Those things in the crib, I said. Did you buy those? Yes, she said. I bought them after I was told. I bought them and I put them away. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't grieve publicly. I couldn't tell anyone why I was grieving. But I needed to do something that acknowledged that a person had come into the world. A person who was half of Eleanor. A person who, even though I had never met her, even though I had no right to any claim on her, was real, and had existed, and mattered. I thought about what it takes to do something like that. To buy tiny clothes for a baby you will never see, and put them in a crib in a locked room, and keep them there for 50 years. The kind of love that does not ask permission or make sense or concern itself with whether it has any entitlement to exist. The kind of love that simply is, and continues to be, regardless of whether the world has any space for it. Granny, I said. And I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. Did you ever look for her? The baby. She looked at me for a long, long moment. And when she spoke, her voice was different, smaller, younger, stripped of the quiet authority that usually lives in it. Her name was Rose, she said. I named her Rose, in my own mind. I don't know what name she was given. I don't know where she grew up. I don't know if she had a good life or a hard life or any life at all. I have thought about her every single day for 54 years. Every single day. The kitchen was very quiet. Granny, I said. Do you want to find her? She looked at me, and for the first time in 3 hours of the most honest conversation I had ever had with anyone, she looked afraid. I am 79 years old, she said. I thought it was too late. It might not be, I said. It might not be too late. She was quiet for a very long time. Outside the window, the light was beginning to go, the afternoon collapsing gently into evening, the garden going from green to gray. And then she said, very quietly, "Then I want to find her."